Welcome back to yet another video. In today's video, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving my favorite film from every single major movie genre. So this is going to be a longer video, and it's also going to be a little subjective in the fact that A, it's my favorite movie of a genre, not necessarily the best movie of the genre, and also the fact that defining movie genres and just genres in general is a fairly complicated process actually for some reason. Like, there's movies that'll fall between two genres and create something new, so is that its own genre, or is that a combination of the two? Like, it gets very confusing the more you think about it. So I tried to find like base genres here, and some of them do still overlap, and some movies do overlap several genres, but I tried to find like the broadest genres I could and pick movies that I thought fit them fairly well. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So comedy was actually a fairly difficult genre for me to pick my favorite of because while I do enjoy comedy and funny movies and shows and stuff, most of the comedy stuff that I watch is through TV shows, or it's just a movie that, say, for example, the MCU. A lot of those films could be considered comedies like Thor Ragnarok, but I still wouldn't consider comedy to be the main genre. So finding a movie where comedy was the main genre was pretty tough for me, and I ended up deciding upon Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So Ferris Bueller's Day Off it's a fun movie, it's super funny. I love how it's like fourth wall breaking, and it's just about a kid trying to have fun, skip school. I love the parade sequence where he dances to Scream and Shout by the Beatles. That's probably my favorite moment of the film. And overall, it's funny, it's lighthearted, it's fun, and I just really enjoyed that movie. And on top of that, Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a very well-made movie, which is very untraditional of most comedies. Like, a lot of pure comedy movies I watch are just like cheap, going for laughs, not going for quality. And I think Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a well-made movie, and it's incredibly funny. So that's why Ferris Bueller's Day Off is my favorite comedy. So next up here we have horror. And horror isn't really a genre that I spend a whole lot of time watching. I did go through a streak back in October where I watched a lot of like the Halloween movies, and I've seen all the It movies, and like I've seen a couple horror movies, but not really a whole ton. And they're not really my favorite, but one that definitely stands out for me is A Quiet Place. So A Quiet Place, I think, is amazing for several reasons. First of all, John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, I love them. I love their chemistry together. They're married in real life, so they work really well as a married couple in the movie. And just all the characters in that movie are really well done. I kind of have a soft spot for John Krasinski, and I thought he directed this movie very well. I loved the sound design of the entire movie. I love that it's more silent than it is noise, if that makes sense. Like, there's times where it's just pure silence, and I love it. It's spooky. There are a couple jump scares, which is pretty common with today's horror, but overall, I think the atmosphere they created was much better than a lot of horror movies nowadays, and it was definitely a lot scarier than some of the old-fashioned horror movies that I've seen. Okay, so next up here we have action, and there's no surprise to anyone that knows me that this movie was going to make the list at some point. Baby Driver is by far my favorite film of all time, and it can fit into several different genres, but I think the genre it most fits into is action. We've got great car sequences, we've got great chase scenes, we've got great gunfire scenes. Just in terms of action, it's well done. I've talked so much about Baby Driver. I love this movie. Everything about it, it's perfect, and it's a well-made movie. It's got great action. What else could you ask for from an action movie? Okay, so for sci-fi here, there's a lot of franchises like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, the Marvel movies. All that type of stuff would probably be considered at least somewhat sci-fi, especially Star Wars. But I decided to go with something that is a standalone film, and probably is better than all those films as well, and that is Inception. I love Inception both for the action choreography, the cinematography, the set design, And just overall, the world that Christopher Nolan created in this film is fantastic. The characters are amazing. In terms of a unique sci-fi world, I think this is one of the better worlds out there. And I thought it was really well done. And just overall, this is another movie that is one of my favorites of all time. And yeah, it's by far my favorite sci-fi as well. So next up here we have the comic book genre. And as far as comic book movies go, they are very similar to action movies. So this is kind of a subcategory, but I feel like it's slightly different enough to warrant its own category. So we're doing it here. And in terms of comic book movies, I love comic book movies. I love everything Marvel does, basically. And DC isn't my favorite, but I still really like most of their movies. And overall, my favorite comic book movie, one of my favorite movies of all time again, is Avengers Infinity War. I think this movie is great in terms of action. It's great in terms of giving us tons of characters that we all know and love, while also not feeling like it has too many characters. Like, we have a ton of characters, but we get enough with them that they don't feel like they're just thrown in for no reason. And I think Thanos is one of the best comic book movie villains of all time, second only to Joker in The Dark Knight. I love his motivations, I love his character, and I love how the film ends. I don't want to spoil it in case people haven't seen it, but I love how this film ends. It's a fantastic conclusion, and just overall, this movie is basically perfect. I can't think of anything I don't like about this movie. So next up here we have Westerns, and I have not watched a lot of Westerns. Actually, I don't think I've watched anything that is solely a Western. So this is another tough category for me. I don't really know why I haven't watched them. I've never been interested. Most of them came out in like the 60s, I want to say, so long before I was born. But there are still some currently made Westerns. They don't really appeal to me. And so for this reason, I chose something that isn't probably considered a fantastic movie by any means and is kind of not really a Western, but I chose Rango. So Rango is an animated kids film that is about a lizard that becomes a sheriff, and I found it pretty entertaining. I didn't rewatch it when making this video. I didn't rewatch any of these movies or watch any movies in preparation for this video because I felt like I should make this like movies that stick with me. That should be what I pick. So this is the only thing I can remember watching that is a Western. So that's really the only reason I picked it. I remember enjoying it as a kid. I don't remember loving it. I don't remember barely anything about it. But yeah, it was a good movie and it's my favorite Western. So next up here we have adventure movies. And this was actually a really difficult category for me to pick from because I don't really know what an adventure movie is. Like, I searched up adventure movies just to see what type of movie came up, and I was having trouble finding something that wasn't a comic book movie. Like, so many comic book movies came up as adventure movies, and I don't think they're adventure movies. I think they're A, comic book movies, and B, action movies. I wouldn't consider them to be adventure movies. So, finding an adventure movie was a little difficult for me. I ended up deciding upon Jurassic Park. However, according to Google, its main genres is action, sci-fi, thriller, then adventure, then fantasy, then mystery. I don't necessarily agree with that list, but I find it to be an adventure movie, and I love Jurassic Park. It's one of my favorite franchises, and this is definitely the best movie in the franchise. I love dinosaurs, I love the cast, I love everything about it. It's a great movie. I would consider it an adventure movie, but considering Google doesn't consider it an adventure movie, I did pick a secondary option, and that is Stand By Me. Stand By Me is a movie I didn't watch until very recently, and I really enjoyed it. It's a coming-of-age story where these 4 kids go on an adventure, and it's really sweet and lighthearted, and I really enjoy it. It's got some great characters, some great relationships, and it's just an overall fun, feel-good movie. So next up here we have mystery. And mystery is another genre that I don't watch too much, but when I do watch it, I really enjoy it. And a film that I watched recently that I really enjoyed from the mystery genre is Knives Out. Knives Out is a fantastic movie. It's got great cinematography, great cast, and The story overall is amazing. It's such a great movie. It starts off as just like a typical murder mystery, gets flipped on its head 20 minutes in, then gets flipped on its head again right before the climax. And I love that. I don't want to spoil it again because it's a great plot twist. I knew to expect a plot twist coming in and I predicted it. If I didn't know there was a plot twist, I probably wouldn't have predicted it, but I don't want to spoil that for anyone, so I'm not going to tell you what that is. I love the plot twist. I love how they revamped the genre and kind of experimented with it. Overall, it's a fantastic movie. Definitely my favorite mystery movie. So next up here we have animation. And I was going over this list with both of my parents, and my mom said, "Oh, you didn't pick something Scooby-Doo?" And I feel like Scooby-Doo is by far my favorite animated movie series. And the only problem with that is I can't really pick out one particular Scooby-Doo movie that I love above the rest. So I decided to pick against a Scooby-Doo movie, and instead I was initially going to go with Cars, because Cars was an amazing movie when I was growing up. It was one of my favorites, and it was super impactful to me. That scene where Radiator Springs goes from like a tourist attraction to a desolate town, that was so sad. I cried when I watched that every time as a kid. But I ended up deciding against it in the end. And the movie that I decided to take its place was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I love this film. Like I said before, I love comic book movies, I love action movies, and this is a great combination of the two. And the animation style is amazing. I love how they incorporated like comic book frames and panels and all that into the story. It's got an amazing aesthetic, and the characters are great, the action's great, everything about this movie is great. It's definitely my favorite animated movie of all time. So initially here, I was going to talk about Forrest Gump, because I love that movie, but the only problem with it is I wouldn't necessarily consider it a drama. I know at heart it is definitely a dramatic story, but I feel like there's so much comedy in it as well that it's very difficult to call it necessarily a drama. It's got some blend of drama and comedy, so it doesn't really fit very well into this category. So I started looking for a movie that fit the drama category more, and I found one that fit very well, and I probably do enjoy more than Forrest Gump, and that is The Shawshank Redemption. The Shawshank Redemption is a great movie about prison and humanizing all of these inmates and what they go through, and I love the characters, I love the relationships, I love the twist at the end where we see that Andy has escaped. It's just a fantastic movie overall. I don't really know what else to say about it besides it's a fantastic movie. I love it, and it's just great. So, I am not a fan of romance movies in the slightest. This was a very difficult category for me to pick. Initially, I was just going to pick Titanic because I've seen it and it was pretty boring, but it was the best I could come up with. But then I remembered a movie I saw once a while back, and that is Silver Linings Playbook. It's not really a fantastic movie. I don't love it, but I did enjoy it still. So I don't remember a whole lot about this movie, but I remember Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. They had a really good chemistry together. I know Jennifer Lawrence won. I want to say she won the Oscar for Best Actress in that movie. I can't remember for sure, but I did like their performances. I thought the relationship between the two of them was pretty good. So as far as romance movies go, this is as good as it gets for me. It's good, it's not great, but yeah. So next up here, we have musicals. Another genre that I don't really enjoy, probably because most of the musicals I've seen are Disney movies. But anyways, I just don't really like the idea of breaking reality to just sing and dance. But if I have to pick one, I think Singing in the Rain. It's a fun movie. It's got a cool story because we're talking about actors transitioning from silent film to sound film. I thought that was pretty cool. The characters themselves are alright. Gene Kelly is really good in musicals, and Debbie Reynolds is pretty good as well, so the relationship between the two of them is nice, and overall the cast does a really good job with the musical element. It's, again, a good movie. I did enjoy it, but it's only as good as the genre allows it, and I don't enjoy musicals for the most part, so it's a good movie, not a great movie, still my favorite of the genre. So next up here we have sports. And sports is another genre that I'm like, is it really a genre? I can't really think of anything else that sports movies would fall into except maybe drama maybe, but even then, not really. So I decided to give sports its own genre, and I've seen quite a few sports movies. Most of them are decent enough, but none of them really stick with me. The only one that I remember sticking with me is $1 Million Baby. And this is a movie about a boxer played by Hilary Swank and her trainer played by Clint Eastwood. And I think the relationship the two of them have is really good. I love the third act. The third act is what I remember. I don't really want to spoil it, but basically the career of Maggie, which is Hilary Swank's character, is ruined, and it gets super dark and depressing at the end. As you guys know, I love dark movies and depressing movies, and the ending to this movie is about as dark and depressing as you can get, and I loved it. So that's definitely my favorite sports movie. Another movie I was briefly considering for my favorite sports movie was The Blind Side, probably because I've seen bits and pieces of it like 40 times throughout health class. When I watched it all the way through on my own time, it's a decent movie, but I think that in terms of sticking with me more, $1 Million Baby is definitely better. So next up here we have pornographic movies. And yes, this is a movie genre. And you know, they're all fantastic. So it's really hard to choose my favorite. I think basically anything that stars Steve Beale, better known as Ted Mosby, is my favorite. Okay, so next up here we have thrillers. And thrillers is a type of genre that I definitely love. There's so many different things you can do with a thriller. You can make it horror, you can make it action, you can make it drama. So many different ways you can make it, but I think the best type of thriller is like the serial killer crime thriller. So initially I was considering Silence with the Lambs, and that's a fantastic movie. But then I decided against that and went with Seven. Seven is another one of my all-time favorite movies. I just love the grit. I love Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman's characters, their relationship, everything about it. Kevin Spacey does a fantastic job as the serial killer, and I love the idea of making the murderer religious and having the 7 deadly sins as like a motif for the killings. I just love it all. And then the twist at the end, fantastic, didn't see it coming. One of my favorite endings in movie history, and overall this is a fantastic movie. I highly recommend it to anyone. Okay, so next up here we have war films. Another type of movie I don't necessarily enjoy, don't necessarily watch a whole lot. I have had Saving Private Ryan recommended to me a few times. I think I would enjoy that movie. It sounds like a good movie. However, I haven't seen it, so I'm not considering it in this list. And a movie that I am saying is my favorite is 1917. Solely for the reason that I love the cinematography, I love the aesthetic, and that's basically it. I don't find the plots of war movies to be the most compelling. It's just like, I don't know, it's meh. But I think the cinematography, this movie definitely stands out in terms of movies, and definitely war movies, so that's why this is my favorite war movie. Okay, so last up here we have documentary. And this is not necessarily a movie, but a documentary I love is the Ted Bundy Conversations with the Killer. This is a series on Netflix. I know it's technically not a movie, but you know what? This is my video. I can do what I want. I love this. I love the deep dive into his mind and what he was doing, and just everything about it I love. I love serial killers. That doesn't sound very good. I love movies about serial killers, and I love learning about them. So I loved this docuseries. If you had to make me pick a documentary movie, I guess Fahrenheit 9/11 is pretty good. But yeah, definitely Ted Bundy Conversations with the Killer is better than that. So that was the last genre I could come up with. You guys can comment below if you think there's a genre I missed. But everything else I feel like is a subcategory of one of these genres. Even these genres do feel some of them are subcategories, but this is the extent of the list I could come up with. Any of these movies, I would recommend all of them, especially the ones that I said are my favorite movies of all time. But depending on what type of movie you like, maybe I picked something you didn't like for example, Western. I know, not very cultured in that, probably not very cultured in romance and musicals as well. So if you guys have any different picks, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be interested to see what you guys have to say. But this has been my picks. I really enjoyed making this video. I basically made this list in like half an hour, and most of that time was just figuring out like the couple difficult ones. So a lot of this was pure emotion and love for movies. So I didn't want to think about this. I just wanted to impulse it, and I think it turned out really good in the end. So if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure you leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new around here. And if you want more updates on videos, check out my Instagram, entity_films. Within the next week, I will be posting a Godzilla vs. Kong review, as well as a MonsterVerse rankings between the 4 movies. So if those are interesting to you, definitely subscribe. Anyways, that's all I have to say. So thank you guys all for watching, and have a good day.